Succession means transferring some entity from one generation to the next generation. And a big part of that is the wages for a guy like me working in the ministry for 40 years. It's very clear who I work for and who pays me. And then so you get to the point where you're going to do this transition, if you're the senior pastor of the church, and now you're going to turn that over to someone else, then that someone else is going to have the wages and the support, financial support, that you had for the last however many years. And that's a question that needs to be answered. How are we going to survive financially? Now, I believe that in Victory Asia, we have a pattern that is all set up to facilitate that, and that is the way the tithe works, right? Members in the local church tithe to the local church. The local church tithes to the region or the nation, the national church headquarters. And the national church headquarters tithe to the Victory Asia region of nations, right? So that's, basically my office, right? That's where I am. And so you could see that if all of the tithing is working properly, there will be resources there to support the senior leader. So technically, our organization in Canada, World Mission Continuum Society, which basically we raise our support through, could say, you know what, Al, we're putting you out to pasture. You have now officially retired because we're going to use that money to support the next generation. That would be a bit of a problem, honestly. Because we're accustomed to having that support to be able to travel around to the nations and to be able to do the things that we do. I mean, it would stop us dead in our tracks. And I don't plan to stop dead in my tracks. I plan to keep going. Now, let me use an example. In Canada, Pastor Paul Just, he planted the church in Grand Prairie, a powerful church, and then felt that he was to turn it over to Pastor Charlotte Quist and then move into more of an apostolic northern Alberta region of planting churches. Now, Pastor Paul is no longer the senior pastor. Who's going to pay him? They've got some kind of arrangement between the mother church that he planted, supports him some, but they don't have to carry the whole thing because now you can't just add a whole nother wage to it, right? And the churches in the northern Alberta area tithe into Victory Churches of Canada, and then Victory Churches of Canada add some support to keep Pastor Paul going. And that seems to be working good. I mean, obviously, that has to be worked out and agreed upon. But see, that's the thing with an apostolic ministry. You do have places where you could draw that support from. You do have some possibilities, some options of putting together a support package for the senior guy who's moving into a broader influence or a greater responsibility. And so the bottom line, as always, is that we have to believe God. We want to be very careful that this financial concern, right, that where am I going to get paid from, does not influence our decisions in a negative way or cause us to hold back or, I'm not going to do that because I'm afraid I won't have enough money in the end. Or I'm not going to do that because I'm afraid that I won't be paid anymore. Hey, you started out without being paid. Don't forget that. If you're a senior apostolic leader, you definitely started out without being paid. It was faith all the way. Well, that faith is not only still works, but it's grown and become more effective and more efficient. And you just watch and see if God doesn't meet all of your needs according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus, if we keep our foundational faith and confession of our faith in the right place and go in the right direction. And it's more than just a cliche. It's that God really does supply the needs of the things that he's called you to do. So, yeah, we're in his hands. Let's go for it. So succession means passing an entity from one generation to another generation. Although this must never be the forefront or the key issue, but part of the entity that you're passing on is lands and buildings and bank accounts and vehicles and equipment and reputations and connections and all of those kind of things. You have to do that wisely as well, and you have to find a place and a way that that's going to work properly. So one of the keys that I see to the future of looking after the lands and the buildings and all those kind of things, again, it can't come under control. It has to come under culture. And so if you've got a culture in the ministry of generosity and release and not hanging on, then you don't have as much problem trying to hang on. But if it becomes about control, then, boy, I tell you what, you see this in so many organizations. We started out with nothing. It was all by faith. Now we have lands, we have buildings, we've got all of this stuff, this equity, valuable stuff, and now we've got to bring in some controls to protect all this stuff. That's the wrong move. You need a culture that will protect that stuff. You can't protect it with controls. It'll slip out of your hands. And not only that, it brings death to the ministry because your focus now becomes saving and controlling and managing and manipulating assets into a safe place. So that's one thing that I've intentionally instilled into all of our leaders, into our family, is that these are not things to be hung on to. We've lost lands and buildings. We've had stuff like that stolen from us. We've had stuff like that fail because you can't predict it. I mean, an earthquake might knock your building down. Like, who knows, right? But that's not the end, because that's not what the ministry depends on. We are not dependent on those things. We're dependent on faith and on God and on our culture and our vision, our passion, our purpose. In passing those things on, just make use of whatever legal entities and channels that are in your country or wherever it is. You know, in Thailand, for example, and I think most countries are like this, we have World Ministry Foundation, a non-government organization that is the owner, the legal owner of the lands and the buildings and all of the stuff. And then it's protected as far as the board. And in the future, down the road, you don't know who's going to be the board of directors. I kind of got a chuckle out of being in the YMCA building in Thailand at one point and learning that all of the board of directors in there are Buddhist business people. There was no Christians in the group. That wasn't the original intention, was it? Young men, young women's Christian association, right? But that happens over time, right? So I would say that buildings and land and that kind of stuff play a very small and insignificant role in succession. And again, because what we're passing on is this vision and this purpose. Yeah, the heart of the ministry. What we're passing on is we make leaders. Now, of course, all of this stuff is infrastructure, but it's not just ownership of land and buildings and all those kind of things. It's things like the Bible colleges, right? The churches, the summit, leadership summits, the platform and all of those kind of things. Those are kind of like the machine, right? Or the infrastructure that allows the We Make Leaders vision to run, right? The Reach, Teach, and Mobilize vision to run. It runs because we have all of this infrastructure, this machine that it runs on, right? It's like this old truck takes me where I want to go. And if it doesn't take me where I want to go, chuck it. So keep in mind, your vision and your purpose is not represented in your buildings. Christianity is not represented in the cathedrals. Those things come and they go and they lose their purpose really easily. You want the purpose in the hearts to continue on forever and ever. And that continues on not by what you build, not by your masterpiece, but it continues on by you telling your story. Mm-hmm.